Morning or hello or good afternoon for wherever you are. We are excited that you are joining us for another Steftalks webinar. Today we have two great speakers that will be joining us to discuss about navigating COVID with smart and virtual trials. If you have any questions during the webinar, go ahead and drop them in the question box. And we will do, depending on time, we will do a Q&A at the end of the webinar. We are also recording this session. So we will send out the recording, the deck, and any takeaways that are super important that we want you to remember. We will send that to you by the end of today. So Nagesh, let's go ahead and get started.
Thank you, Amy. Appreciate it. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Based on your time zones. Today we'll talk about navigating COVID-19 with smart and virtual trials. And we would like to keep it more interactive, engaging, and hope you all will like it. Okay. So I'm Nagesh Jadhav. I lead the Life Sciences Digital BU at Stefanini, been with Stefanini for 1 year and been in the life sciences industry for more than 15 years in multiple roles. Thank you. And we have a very experienced panelist, Dr. Susanna Corritori. She would hop in at any time. And then Avik Pal. I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hi, thank you, Nagesh. Yeah, I'm Avik Pal from CliniOps. We started CliniOps about 7 years back, primarily focusing on digitization of clinical trials. So I come from a technology background, a data science background. But when we looked at the clinical trials, there were still a significant amount of paper-based and manual processes, which we wanted to digitize, and that's how we got started. We'll talk more about our journey and some of the things that we've done. But with that, I pass it back to Nagesh.
Thank you, Avik. It's a pleasure to have you. So the topics we will cover is what is the regulatory landscape and impact of COVID-19 on clinical trials. We'll have Susanna anytime join and cover that. And then how sponsors can restart their current trials, which are on hold with latest virtual trials and smart trials technologies. And how organizations can rethink and redesign their future trials for new normal, and how various stakeholders can benefit with smart and virtual trials. Okay, feel free to ask questions anytime, and we can take and we can also cover those at the end of the webinar. As we all know, less than 50% of the eligible patients participate in the trials, and with COVID-19, the patients participating in the trials has reduced significantly. First, due to the risk. Other is due to the travel restrictions, and also the sites and investigators, doctors, nurses are unavailable and they are occupied by COVID patients. So it has taken heavy toll on the trials which were ongoing, and also sponsors and CROs, everyone is finding difficult to start their new trials as well. So the entire clinical trials has been significantly impacted with COVID-19. Okay, and if you see, more than 70% of the trials in the recent weeks have gone on hold, but there are signs some of the trials have started recruiting patients and sites have started opening up. Okay. So Susanna would cover these topics on how regulatory landscape has been impacted, and she will share the regulatory perspective as soon as she joins. Okay. So Avik, till Susanna joins, we can talk about what are the technological solutions that organizations can think of to start their trials on hold, and also think about trials in future with this virtual trials. Can you please share some thoughts on this?
Sure. So thank you, Nagesh. So as we look at clinical trials and the way it has evolved over the years, around the mid-90s, the EDCs were first introduced into the market, electronic data collection. But 25 years down the line, we still see a hybrid way of operations, where data is still collected on paper at many sites around the world, and it's called the source data. And they're collected on paper and goes into binders and folders and cupboards and stays there for a while. So that has to change, right? And the moment you collect your first point of data entry, which is the source on paper, there's a lot of downstream activities that happens. Now with the COVID, those downstream activities are also getting extremely difficult. One of the primary downstream activities is the monitoring or the source data verification. So we have to figure out a way to get that source digital at any cost, right? Regardless of what kind of site they are, what kind of therapeutic areas they are, what kind of phases they are, global trials, smaller trials, across the board. Now, historically, the data collection was primarily focused at patient coming to hospital and the doctor or the nurse collecting the data, and that was the mode of data collection. Now, over time, patients got admitted and they were handed with a, like a smartphone with e-diary, right? So they would collect their data themselves. So that was the second mode of data collection, where it's still at the hospital, but this time the patient is collecting their own data. Okay? Now, going forward, things are going to change a lot, where we have to decentralize, right? That's where the decentralization or the virtual trial comes into picture, where not just the hospital, but going beyond the hospital, letting patient collect data themselves from the convenience of their home. So that's the next node, where patient can collect data from their home settings. And then the fourth one is not just the patient alone, but visiting nurses or phlebotomists or mobile nurses visiting patient home, and they are the one collecting the data. It could be a blood draw, it could be some other less invasive. You can't do an MRI scan at home, but there are many other things that you can do from home, right? So there's a mix of 4 different modes of data collection that we see between users and locations, and that's how we look about holistically what decentralized trials or virtual trials are all about. And if you look at on the right hand side, it basically talks about where the data is collected, right? Home or hospital. How the data is collected, right? It could be collected by just entering the data into a platform or a mobile device or a smartphone, or it could be collected through device integration, right? Through medical devices, through connected devices at home settings, that enables continuous monitoring, good clean data to start with, in a whole bunch of ways. Who is collecting the data, right? We spoke about it. It could be a nurse, phlebotomist, doctor, patient, anybody. But the point of first data entry is basically the source data, and we need to figure out a way to digitize this. And there are challenges, right? So for example, in the US hospitals, and we have done several, I'm based out of California. So in downtown Silicon Valley, we see many hospitals where the doctor is connected and they're entering data into their EMR system or some other healthcare system. But we've also seen, we've done several trials in such settings where when the doctor is going for a round, bed to bed, room to room, patient to patient, floor to floor, things aren't that easy. The network settings in these hospitals are very stringent. So they kind of mask them from entering data digitally at the point of care, and the doctors don't have much choice but to go with a clipboard where the data is first collected on paper. So they go for a round, collect all the data on the clipboard, come back, but then that becomes the source document, right? So how can we figure out a way to fix that or improve on that? If you go for global clinical trials, you'll see the challenges are very different. Let's say it's a trial with 20 sites, where 5 are in Africa, 5 are in Asia, 5 are in South America, and the rest 5 in US or Europe. So some of these other emerging world sites have another challenge, which is point of care internet. Internet, of course, is there, right? Otherwise, the site wouldn't have been selected in the first place as a part of the trial. But internet at the point of care is a challenge. Where the patient-doctor interaction is happening, there isn't, or it's spotty, or it's not reliable, right? High latency, low, bandwidth, all different kinds of problems, right? You also see challenges in terms of, computer literacy, right? So excellent doctors, excellent nurses, but not very tech savvy. So they prefer to go with paper, right? So, offline, data collection is a big, savior in such cases. But then the moment you go offline, there's a lot of regulatory and, compliance and, other, issues that comes up. So it's a problem that, we all have to get together and solve. We've done quite a few of those in that area. Being one of the pioneers in the e-source space. But we'll talk more about it, but those are at a very high level, my personal thoughts on virtual trials and decentralized trials and how can we, go about addressing it.
Thank you, Avik. That's exciting perspective. So as we understood where data can be collected for virtual trials and what are the challenges it helps overcome, let's understand how patient-centric solutions can be leveraged in virtual trials to make it more engaging, increase the patient engagement and retention. So,
Nagesh, when you start collecting data from patient home, there are many things that we have to keep in consideration, right? How much the patient is willing and to collect their data on a digital device. And it can vary from across age. A relatively younger, kid is more, tech savvy and willing. A relatively an elderly, patient may need some hand holding, right? Millennials are better equipped, but others maybe not. And the requirement for elderly patients may be more intrusive, or maybe more elaborate, right? So we have to think about that perspective, which is, and how can we create a solution and helps with the adoption, right? We can have one of the best solutions out there in the world, but if it's not designed in a way which is easy for our senior citizens and easy for not very tech savvy, right? Not at all tech savvy, if I may. I mean, the best possible design is something that you use it, but you don't even feel it, right? It's happening just. So that's the level we have to get to. But I think what COVID did is it significantly triggered the adoption of such technologies. See, one of the reasons is, and you mentioned some of those in the early slides, which is patients are not willing or able to go to the hospitals, right? They're not able if there is a lockdown, if there is some of these other travel bans and other things, and they may be not even willing if they can do without. For example, if the nearest hospital is a COVID center and they know that tons of COVID patients are stacked, they would prefer to stay back home. Who knows, right? Unless absolutely needed, kind of. There may be beds full of COVID, so there is no room for a patient to be admitted. The nurses and doctors may be just super stressed with all this pandemic, dealing that clinical trial is probably the last thing on their mind. So there are many different things why they would not, right? So telemedicine can come to a rescue. Okay. Again, telemedicine cannot just change the whole world, right? It cannot solve every problem, but it's a good starting point where you can do a significant amount of work remotely, not everything, but at least things can get started, right? The next possible one is, okay, you got telemedicine started, but the patient can do something very basic, as simple as, have you taken the medication today, yes or no, right? How do you feel after that, in a scale of 1 to 10, right? Okay, I feel 7, or I feel 2, or I feel 10. For that, you don't need to go to the hospital. You can do this remotely, right? And the next one may be, blood draw. So yes, if you need to go to the hospital, but can a nurse be sent to a patient home if the patient is not able or willing to come to the hospital? So that's the next level, right? And then, at some point you don't have a choice. You have to do an, like an oncology study for, chemotherapy or something. Yes, you have to go to the hospital, right? So, but what I'm saying is, how much can you minimize to still continue, business as usual with some disruption, but not like complete halt? I mean, we saw 74% of the sites stopped clinical trials post-COVID for a good amount of months. Of late, some of them have started enrolling patients back, as you said, but that kind of disruption is scary, right? It puts everything to a halt. The whole science comes to a standstill. So so that's basically from the telemedicine perspective, video conferencing, right? How can we do it in a GZ, compliant way, HIPAA compliant, 21 Part 11 compliant, GDPR compliant. So all those things, and all of them have some regulatory perspective as well. And wish Susanna was able to make it today, but she could have shared some of those thoughts, where in some states, some countries, maybe that's not even approved. So people are using it for COVID. I think there's a lot of relaxation that FDA has done in terms of enabling technology adoption, or at a massive speed that is unprecedented in the life sciences domain. But others are gearing up and catching up. So that's one. Now, before you start a clinical trial, right, the first thing is patient consent. And there's a lot of in the past there used to be a lot of even fraud, right, where consent was taken differently, or not even consented, but you start taking data and stuff like that. Good checks and balances started putting proper usage of the consenting process. And it's even more significant when I'm talking about large global trials. I mean, we do work across more than 25 countries globally, including Asia, Africa, South America, and of course several places in the US. But in the global settings, we've seen some of these are even more stringent. I mean, it stands out more than things a lot better and compliant here in the US. But how can you do remote consenting? Right, and there are different ways. How do you ensure that the person consenting is the right person? Right. Sometimes the person or the patient may not be in a position to sign. How can LAR or a legally authorized person can sign on behalf? If you're doing pediatric studies, how can the mom or the dad, or as a parent-child combination of consent? So there are many different ways that we need to think through. I think the least friction way is just figure out a way to consent remotely, digital consent, e-consent, and then get started. But then a lot of these other things will hopefully solidify and streamline and evolve, and a lot of guidelines will, I'm sure, there are many, but things will start popping up. Identification of the right patient, right? So is the right person signing? Can we do a video, telemedicine call while this e-consenting is being taken place, right? So, and record the session and things like that. So those are, my thoughts on the consent. ECO and QOL, I mean, quality of life, we talked about it, right? So, I mean, how do you feel? And as you move along, and, there are many different instruments out there. So to capture those data, ECO data. ePro and eDiary also we spoke about, if the patient is admitted and on a regular basis collecting all that data themselves. And then finally, in a home setting, wearables and connected devices, I think that plays a significant role. There are many things now which has come in the size of a palm, where earlier it used to occupy a whole room to collect continuous data. So integration of such devices with the patient's smartphone, so that remotely those data can be analyzed, viewed, and interjected if needed, right? For example, we are working with one of the top 5 or top 2 pharma, if I may, where data is actually collected from patient home, right? And it is a small mask, kind of a digital device for capturing breathing pattern of the patient. Right? Now, this is a continuous data. It's a waveform data. It's not the traditional alpha or neuromorphic data that we are used to. It's a continuous waveform data, and the device and the smartphone, patient smartphone is connected, and our app sits on the patient's smartphone, so it captures all that's the wave directly. And what it does is, and here's the cool thing, right? So historically, data is collected today. It's not analyzed immediately, right? It's analyzed, days later, weeks later, sometimes even months later. Right? But here, the use case here is, to capture heart attack or stroke, right? So what it does is, once we start capturing the wave patterns, we have built in analytics and AI/ML built in, so the machine learns the typical breathing pattern of a person. I mean, right? So there's a certain curve, and another patient may be breathing a little differently, right? So the machine can capture that, just slight difference, which in a naked eye you and I cannot. Now, once the machine knows, okay, this is the normal pattern of the person, by analyzing its data for the let's say 15 days or 30 days or whatever, it has a good sense, right? Now, suddenly one day the person is breathing like, right, grasping for breath. It's a sign of a stroke or heart attack or something, right? So the machine now knows that this is a pattern deviation. So right, it can detect that pattern recognition technology. It can detect the deviation and instantly send a notification to the right person. So the doctor can get notified that, hey, this person is breathing abnormally, needs to be interjected or taken care of. So these kind of things, it could even save a life, right? Earlier, these things were not out there in our fingertips, but now we have. So.
Okay, thank you, Avik. Interesting perspectives here that you have thrown light on. As industry is moving towards more and more risk-based centralized monitoring, these solutions could certainly be of help, where it could be more risk-based monitoring.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So here, Avik, we would like, as we understood the tools, technologies now, let's understand how we can optimize the study and the drug development cycle, leveraging this virtual trial solutions and decentralized trials. Okay. So Avik, can you
Sure.
elaborate on this?
Yeah. See, there's a lot of advantages of doing the way we are doing. There's obviously resistance to change, and some of these will take a little bit of time. But I think the amount of support that FDA has provided in this, during the pandemic and throughout, and the type of messaging we are hearing constantly from the regulatory agencies that this is here to stay. It's a one-sided door, right? You just cross that door. It's not not coming back again. So this is the new normal, and this is how we are going to go forward. And telemedicine is here to stay. By doing so, you reduce the cost of patient visits at hospitals significantly. That's a huge reduction in the cost, right?
Absolutely.
There's a lot of benefits for the patients to continue to stay on the study, because in the past there's a lot of patient retention was a huge challenge. Enrollment would drop or very slow, right? And even after enrolling, down the line they would drop off, and all that puts a huge cost burden on the sponsors and the CROs to re-enroll newer patients and stuff like that. So these things have reduced significantly and will continue to reduce, because the patient doesn't have to travel like 50 miles or 2-3 hours each way, and then stand waiting in that waiting room for another 2 hours, and then eventually getting treated for 5 minutes, right? So it's it's frustrating. And sometimes when you're the patient is a kid, the kid has to drop off from school, the parent has to take off from work, and it's not easy. Same with an elderly mom or dad. Again, somebody has to accompany, and it's difficult, right? So giving the comfort of doing things from home helps in a big way. Another thing I wanted to highlight here is we just heard some news, not so good news, about a big trial in the phase 3 for COVID stopped, right? And just halted because of some safety concerns. So I hope we come out of this very soon, because the whole world is eagerly and looking forward to this drug. And but see, the thing is, when some of these trials, and I'm not talking about this particular example, but in general, when we run a phase 1 trial, let's say let's say at Stanford Hospital, right?
Yeah.
25 patients, single site, phase 1. Okay? Ideally, all the 25 patients will probably be living in and around that Stanford Hospital.
Yeah.
Imagine who can afford to live in that Palo Alto area. Rich people and different lifestyle, different food habits, different kind of way of so now that's not a very representative, patient population.
Yeah.
Now, if we go with the assumption, okay, that is the representative patient population, and we go to phase 2, we can increase the horizon a little bit, but we'll have, 5 other Stanfords. So this time we are having Stanford Hospital, Harvard Hospital, Duke's, hospital, and Sloan Kettering. Again, it's same. The representation of the patient is not there, right? You're, very sophisticated patient and very
Different lifestyle.
because otherwise you can't even afford to live in that area, right? So how can we get patients? So let's say Palo Alto, right? How can I get patient from, let's say, 2 hours away in the north, where we have a good amount of African American population, or 2 hours south where we have a good amount of Hispanic population, right? Difficult to do unless you have these virtual and remote capabilities. So when we actually do get to a much bigger stage like phase 3 and stuff, where we're wanting to have a much more diversified population, we start to seeing these failures creeping up to a point where it becomes statistically alarming. And my point here is, how can we get a better mix of subject population early on, so that if we need to fail early.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? We need to pivot early. We need to make some twists to adaptive. So a lot of these things are only possible if you can have some of these so there's a lot of talk about this diversity in clinical research, right? Absolutely. That's basically very much needed, and unfortunately the way the current settings are, it's difficult to reach to that diversity without technology, right? So I think going forward, technology will play a big role in terms of enabling some of these other things where, in the naked eye, it may not be, that much of visible, but when you land a huge study in phase 3 that fails because and once you do the analysis and you figure out, some of them obviously could be medical reasons or science and other things, but a lot of them could be just not having the right diversified patient population early on. So and that's a very costly failure down the line. So I just want to highlight something.
Yeah, thank you, Avik. And to add to that, if you see, if we add into the diversity of geographies and countries, the costs would significantly reduce, because the trial site cost or per patient cost in these diverse developing countries would be lower compared to sites in the US, like Palo Altos and Californias and New Yorks, right? So apart from reducing the cost with digital data collection, readily available risk-based monitoring, the trials could be done faster. There would be better insights, clean data, and it will significantly help in expediting the trial, completing the trial in time and in budget. That is what I think virtual trials and smart trial solutions could help in.
Very true, very true. And actually, we are supporting trials in more than 15 countries in Africa alone. And these are not easy geographies. They're very difficult to, collect data. But with our, offline data collection and online sync, so by decoupling the requirement of internet, it has become very much more easier for, in such geographies to collect data in a complete offline mode with all the checks and balances in place. So you're collecting very clean data. The system is designed in a way that forces you to collect clean data. So if you're entering data which is, not right or outside the range, it will pop up right there. So, let's say, blood pressure, 120, right? But by mistake, you just wrote 720. So if you write it in a paper, paper source, it goes into binder and folder and cupboard and sits there for weeks. The typical average is 6 to 12 weeks, as they say, for large global trials. And only after then, somebody notices it and a query is generated, and it takes a frustrating back and forth between the sites and sponsors, and the query is, resolved. But most times, if the source data is wrong, you don't have much choice but to kind of, redo it, and just time, money, cost, frustration, all of that. But here, in a complete offline mode, you enter 720, it will pop up saying, hey, this is out of range, please fix. So all the nurse needs to do is look at the monitor and change it back to 120. And an audit trail gets triggered behind the scene where it says, okay, first entry 720 by so-and-so person in so-and-so date, second entry, 120 by, not, same person 2 seconds later, reason for change, okay, typo or whatever, right? So we start with a very clean data. And then, typically from that 6 to 12 weeks, which is the, normal average for, getting from the point the data was first collected to the point that it's ready for analysis, we can bring it down to much lower, right? So we typically say 6 to 12 hours, at the max. So in good hospitals, it's happening real-time synchronization, so the data is there. In not so where there's spotty internet, they can do once in the morning, once in the lunchtime, once at the end of the day, or something like that. In very resource poor, remote places, health centers and other places, they're doing it by the end of the day. So before the doctor goes back home, you just swing across the aisle to the IT room of the hospital, and in a second or less than a second, all the data is synchronized. So the point I wanted to say is that diversity in terms of, going into the suburbs of the bigger cities, because most trials will actually pick a hospital which is most likely in a tier 1 or tier 2 city, right? So going beyond that, telemedicine and virtual trials will help in a big way. And as you rightly pointed out, going beyond into different geographies as well. So, right, so where earlier, it's not so easy to reach, now we can reach.
Yeah, and to add to that, then if geographies are added in the current setting, which is conventional, centralized, it is difficult and it costs a lot and takes a lot of time to do source data verification, right? Because it's on paper for most of the sites, and also site monitoring adds that both of these account more than 40% of the trial cost. So with smart and virtual technologies, this remote source data verification can be conducted remotely, and then also site monitoring can be done remotely, right, Avi?
Yeah. Both of those are actually picked up in a big way. Both RSDV, remote source data verification, and centralized monitoring. See, the access to the monitor is provided centrally, right? It's a user, role-based access, right? So what the monitor is supposed to see, the data managers and others are not going to see the same thing, right? So they will have access to, the right data to do whatever monitoring they need to do to ensure that it's, nice and clean and signed off. And these processes are much more streamlined, right? So you don't have to. So there are certain types of data. For example, a blood report, let's say, okay, it's coming from another system. So let's say it's a PDF report that needs to be attached, and that has to have access to the monitor. And others won't have access to that. Right? Others will have access to just the data. But for the monitor, that's one thing that is being monitored. Now, any other data that is collected digitally at the point of care directly into the system does not need RSDB or even source data verification, because that is the source. According to FDA, that is the source, electronic source or e-source. Right? The FDA's September 2013 guidelines, clearly describes what is source, and if that is the source, you don't need a source data verification. So the amount of verification effort itself will reduce significantly once you start adopting technologies like this.
Absolutely. Yep. Thank you. I think if anyone of you has questions on the regulatory aspects, maybe you can ask, and we can cover from Susanna later if she joins, or maybe we can answer your questions later. So what are the benefits of virtual and hybrid trials? With Stefanini, we are working with 4 of the top 10 pharmas, and 8 of the top 10 CROs work with us. And we are hearing from our customers that they are seeing benefits from virtual trials that they have been doing earlier. And also we are seeing demand in virtual trials because they see the benefits where, as we discussed during this so far, there is significant benefit on the patient side. There is improved quality of life for patient. The patient does not have to travel, spend time and effort on traveling. that also reduces the costs for sponsors. Also, there is increased patient engagement and retention with this virtual trials. And if you see, apart from reducing time cost, the revenue is also seem to increase with doing trials faster and doing the submissions faster. And CROs, they are getting cleaner data. They can reduce their operational costs by, since with digital data collection there is little manual transcription, data collection, and so forth. They can close out early, and sites become audit ready, and they can do mobile follow-ups with the patients as well. So we are seeing demand for growing for virtual decentralized trials. Organizations are doing hybrid trials for also getting into hybrid trials, and that is overall benefit we are seeing. And there is Avik, you would like to share some thoughts here as well?
Yeah, so I think hybrid trial, as you mentioned, is in a good way for organizations that have not ventured into this, this pathway to start, right? So, for example, I have a protocol, and it has 10 visits per patient, right? Historically, I would expect all the visits to come, all the patients to come at the hospital for every single visit, and that's how it would be done. Now, let's say, just for the simple arithmetic, 10 sites and 10 patients per site and 10 visits per patient. So all in total, we are talking about 1,000 visits. Yep. across all the 10 patients and across all the 10 sites. Now, these 1,000 visits, let's say, of the 10 per patient, I rethink in the changed scenario in the context of the current COVID pandemic and all of that, and I'd see, okay, 3 can be done from home, or 4 can be done from home. The other 6, they have to come to the hospital. I mean, depending on the therapeutic area. So right there, of the 1,000 visits, I have smashed off 300 or 400 visits. Huge savings, right? And big benefits. So, and it also gets in that hybrid mode. So if I put the boundaries that, okay, everything has to be done remotely, and that is my definition of hybrid trial, my virtual trials, then it's very difficult. The total available market for what trials can be done completely virtual becomes very limited, very less. But if you broaden it up, okay, even if you can do 1 or 2 visits from home, just get started, right? That itself will give you a good benefit, and it will give you some good understanding. And your next trial, you can do 3 visits from home, 4 visits from home, and after you do 5-10 trials, you have a much better idea of how much can you leverage pushing from home in terms of remote data collections today. So I think it's a gradual transition that most companies should start thinking of in terms of getting into the virtual space. It's not like all or nothing. It is let's start with the midway, and the midway could be more tilted towards centralized and less virtual to start with. I mean, if you're more conservative, or more decentralized, less site-based visits, if the therapeutic area allows for example. So I think that's a good way to get started in terms of getting benefit and of this new normal and adjusting. And it also requires cultural change, change in the people's mindset, and the adaptability of the technology. The monitors have to start thinking that, okay, no, not everything I need to monitor that I've been doing for the last 20 years. I need to monitor certain things which requires SDV, and others, if the source itself is direct electronic source, then it probably doesn't require monitoring. So all getting into all of these things, right? Even for the patients, what can I do via televisit? So first, I need to get that comfort level, that human connection, right? Human touch. I mean, now if you look at it, if I go to a hospital, the doctor is fully masked and guarded, and and so it's all. There's no, it's very difficult to make that connection, right? But if the doctor is from the comfort of his or her office, and if the patient is from the comfort of so if the patient has to go to the hospital again, the patient has to put mask and this and gloves. So there is very limited connection, right? But remotely, like you and I are talking right now, I can see your face, your eyes, your the way if you smile, I can see that too. So those matter a lot, right? So but some patients may think that I need that in-person first visit as a kind of almost like a prerequisite for me to have faith in the doctor for doing remote visit for the second one or the third one. And so be it. I mean, we can do that, right? It's very easy to, if you structure the subject calendar, say 10 visits, just remote on-site. Okay, this one is supposed to be on-site, but suddenly the patient fell sick or is not able to come to the hospital. Can it be done remote? If so, yes, I put it to remote, right? What is the regulatory implication of that? Will it be treated as a protocol deviation? So these are the things that to think through. But technologically, we can make it very simple and easy for even for the the site staff to figure out a way to handle and navigate these things and make it very seamless. I mean, it doesn't have to be like 5 different applications to do 5 different things. I mean, if I have to collect data from home, it has to be this application, hospital data, that application, patient data, and EID, some other application, becomes very complicated, right? Even for the running a trial requires so many different modules, right? I mean, we talk about EDC, ePro, EICF, informed consent, CTMS, randomization, a whole bunch of things, right? Why, right? Eventually they all sit on the same database. So a unified platform that can have all the data in one place, and including data from EHRs or medical devices, all of that, but then give you the right functionality for each, right? So EDC, right? Electronic data collection. If I'm collecting all the data electronically through eSource, through ePro, through telemedicine, and through other through medical device and other things, that EDC is, kind of misdemeanor, if I may. Like, I'm not collecting anything there. It's not an electronic data collection anymore. What is it? It's a data management functionality. So when I'm seeing the data and I'm generating queries and I'm resolving queries, I'm, doing other things, data science, I'm looking at the charts, graphs, dashboards, and I'm making meaning out of it. So it's basically a data management function. I'm not collecting any data there. The data is being collected, by, eSource and ePros and eDiaries and medical devices and other things. Earlier, like 25 years back, it was different. All the data, would be collected there, but not anymore. So what I wanted to say is that, a lot of these things can be, streamlined over time and make it very easy both for the doctors, physicians, study team, if I may, and also for the patients. Right? So.
Absolutely. Yeah. So again, thank you, Avik. I think to summarize, I mean, virtual trials, smart trials, adopting digital technologies are the way forward. Organizations are looking to adopt these technologies. Most of the organizations are, have embarked on translational research, and they were struggling because the data was not digital. Most of the cases, it was on the clinical side then, which is translational research from genome to bedside and care. The piece of data, good data, was missing on the clinical side. Now with virtual and smart trial solutions, where data is completely electronic, I think genome to bedside patient care will become a reality now. So that is what I think, organizations are looking to start with virtual and hybrid trials. Okay. Thank you, Avik, and thank you, everyone. Feel free to ask any questions. I'm handing it over to Amy. Hope you liked it.
Great, thank you so much. So we do have a question. How do virtual trials increase patient enrollment? Yeah,
so good question. Actually, we touched upon this one briefly. So how do we increase patient enrollment, right? So one of the way of increasing patient enrollment is by increasing the what do you call that? The outreach, right? So by by boxing that, okay, if my zip code is 94537, Stanford, Palo Alto, I'm only able to recruit patients who are able to commute to come to the sites, every week, every month, whatever, throughout the trial. Then my outreach is very less, right? I cannot afford or expect a person living, further north or further down south, 2 hours, away to register in the trial, because it is not possible for a person to kind of come visit every week, driving that long, and almost it takes a whole day, 2 hours drive this way, sit there for 2 hours, and do the treatment for some time, and then go back for another 2 hours. It's takes away, so it's difficult, right? But just by enabling digital and virtual and telemedicine, you have now a much wider pool to enroll patient, right? So that's how you can basically help. And also by enabling with these digital technologies and remotely, it's much faster as well, right? So if you can streamline a lot of these siloed processes in a very systematic workflow, excuse me, where you come, you read the informed consent, you ask any questions to ensure that you know it, you take a short questionnaire and get a score so that it's proof that you understood it, and then you sign it, and done, so you're enrolled, right? And then next is, unless you do all of these things, the next visit doesn't even show. So there's a dependency to finish the previous one, follow the protocol, go to the next one. So if you put this all in a nice workflow where with these dependencies and making it smoother, it helps in a big way to speed up the process as well. So enrollment becomes faster, enrollment becomes wider, and enrollments actually becomes much more, outreach increases, diversity increases, so a lot of benefits.
Yeah, and I would like to add here, like we are seeing our customers showing interest in our social listening solution, where we can use social media tools to identify the sites, identify the patients based on their tweets, based on their sentiments on, let's say, for a particular indication, diabetes. We can identify which states and which cities, which geographies are having more patients tweeting about diabetes for which particular indication. That these latest social media tools can be leveraged to identify the sites and patient selection as well, and to that can again help us to do the targeted enrollment campaigns the sponsors can do. Right.
Yeah, patient enrollment is a big challenge, right? So anything that can help solve that problem, huge advantage to the industry.
Absolutely. Yeah. Any other questions? And Avik, a quick question I have is, how do you think organizations should embark if they haven't started yet for virtual trials, they don't have any solution, and even they haven't thought, but how can they embark on virtual trials now if they want to, technologically?
Right. So I would suggest, hybrid is a good way to go. It actually gives them a common middle ground where you don't risk everything saying that 100% virtual. At the same time, you don't take the burden of doing everything 100% centrally at coming to the hospital. So midway actually helps in a big way to at least get started, right? Get over the hump, right? Do 2 visits remotely, 3 visits, or incidents remotely, right? So so that's how I think organizations should get started. But I think it's a mindset to adapt to the new normal, to be relevant in the new normal. You don't have much choice but to embrace technology and embrace virtual trials and get the benefit of that. I also hear in the industry that many of them are actually doing smaller pilots, and the thought is that it is only for smaller trials, right? Or only for certain types of trials, dermatology, for example. right? I can take, picture the skin rash remotely from home. I can send it, and they can analyze it, and stuff like that. Doctors can look at it, give the recommendation, stuff like that. But no, I mean, I think, don't have to box yourself or limit yourself to certain types of studies, certain scale of studies and certain therapeutic area, studies, or even phases of studies. I mean, we did back in 2016, 2017 timeframe, early days of time. The term was also, gradually getting coined. I mean, hasn't picked up, momentum like it is now, right? So almost 26,000 patients across 5 countries, 6 or 7 different multilingual languages. 100% of the data collected from patient home. So, good technology can be very scalable as well, and adapt to the requirements of patients and requirements of the studies, and ensure that the study team is comfortable with all of that. And we have also, of course, done small 25 patient single site kind of studies, and that's, you'll see many examples of such. But the volume or the scale that I just mentioned are very limited, right? They're not very many, and people need to think bold enough to be, okay, these size trials can also be done virtually. So just wanted to let you know, yes, it can, and there are studies that we have supported in that size and scale, and spotless, and many of these sites were remote, I mean, emerging world countries as well, 0 data loss. Right, so that's another very big important thing, that getting to 99% data safety, security, and is one aspect, and getting to 100% with 0 loss is another paradigm. So that last mile is always the most difficult problem to solve. So once you're able to do that regardless of what the technology is, what the this bandwidth is, what the latency is, what the computer literacy of the study team is, does not matter. Whatever is collected will be available, and nothing will be lost in transit, right? So while you're synchronizing the data, the Wi-Fi goes off, right? Spotty internet. Do I lose something? And how do I ensure that the handshake comes back exactly where it left before, right? So look, we spent a huge amount of our IP, there are multiple patents filed to ensure good compression technology that to work in such difficult geographies as well. At the same time, ensure that no data loss happens in such So there are publications on the studies, and in PubMed, and PLOS Medical, and several other elite journals of the benefits of what we did and how we did, and how the customers this is sponsored. I said called a triple drug program with 3 top pharma companies was involved together. So yeah, if companies want to get started in their initial ventures, there of course we can share a lot of our learnings in helping our customers in that journey, and we can figure out the right thing.
Yeah, and yeah, absolutely. What is needed: diversity, quality of life, and scalability that can be achieved through virtual and smart trials. In fact, as it's more easy to do that. Thank you so much, Avik. And if we would have been glad if we would have had Susanna to cover the regulatory aspect, but what we can do is we can schedule another webinar where we'll focus on the regulatory aspect. Okay. And feel free to reach out if you have any questions to start to do the evaluation for you, guide you on embarking on virtual and smart trials. We'll have Avik, Susanna discuss. Okay. Feel free to reach out to me. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Nagash and Ekak. Thank you so much, everyone. Like I mentioned, we did record this session with the Q&A, so check your inboxes later today to get the deck and the recording and some main takeaways. We hope that you have a great rest of your day and a weekend, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.